Who was ultimately responsible for the sinking of the Titanic? Our story begins with the Titanic, a ship of dreams, a beacon of human achievement. Born from the ambitious minds at Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland, she was a marvel of her time. The construction process was an enormous undertaking, involving over 15,000 workers over a span of 2 years. The result? A ship that was the largest moving object ever built by the hand of man at the time. The Titanic was heralded as the Unsinkable Ship. She was equipped with the most advanced safety features of her era. These included 16 watertight compartments designed to close at the flick of a switch, an innovation that led to her bold and somewhat premature moniker. The Titanic was not merely a ship. She was a floating city, boasting luxurious amenities that rivaled the finest hotels on land. She offered her passengers an unparalleled journey of comfort and elegance with grand staircases, sumptuous dining rooms, and a plethora of leisure facilities. The confidence in the Titanic was palpable. The builders, the crew, and the passengers, they all believed in the ship's invincibility. The maiden voyage was highly anticipated, attracting the cream of high society, along with hundreds of emigrants seeking a new life in America. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic embarked on her first and ultimately, her last voyage. She set sail from Southampton, England, bound for New York City with 2,208 souls on board. As the behemoth ship pulled away from the dock, the air was filled with a sense of excitement, anticipation, and pride. Little did they know the fate that awaited them in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The Titanic set sail on April 10, 1912, a symbol of human achievement. But the Unsinkable was about to face a formidable foe. Icebergs, those gargantuan mountains of floating ice, were not an unknown threat to the mariners of the early 20th century. But on the fateful night of April 14, 1912, they were not given the deference they deserved. The Titanic was not a stranger to iceberg warnings. Throughout her maiden voyage, the wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride were busy receiving and transmitting messages, including several iceberg alerts from nearby ships. However, these warnings were not given the priority they warranted. Why, you might ask? There were a few reasons. First, there was a certain level of complacency about icebergs. Mariners of that era often saw icebergs as navigational hazards, yes, but not as potential destroyers of ships. They were considered more of a nuisance than a lethal threat. Second, there was an unshakable belief in the Titanic's invulnerability. She was touted as the unsinkable ship, a marvel of modern engineering. This faith in the ship's structural integrity and the overconfidence in her abilities, sadly, led to a disregard for the iceberg warnings. Lastly, there was the issue of speed. Titanic was making a swift passage across the Atlantic, eager to impress and make headlines with a record-breaking arrival in New York. This ambition for speed overrode the caution that should have been exercised in the face of iceberg warnings. As the night fell, the radio messages warning of ice were largely ignored, and the Titanic continued her journey at full speed. It was a race against time, a gamble against nature, with stakes higher than anyone on board could have possibly imagined. And so, the stage was set. The warnings were dismissed, the ice was underestimated, and the ship was moving too fast. The Titanic, the pride of the White Star Line, the largest ship in the world, was steaming ahead, blind to the danger that lurked in the dark. The night of April 14, 1912 would prove to be the Titanic's last. As the evening air chilled the North Atlantic waters, the mammoth ship plowed ahead, its engines humming a steady rhythm. The Titanic, a symbol of human audacity and technological prowess, was about to face her nemesis, a silent, lurking adversary, an iceberg. The collision was far from a spectacular crash. It was instead a deceptive scrape, a subtle graze that initially went unnoticed by many aboard. In the ship's command, however, the gravity of the situation was quickly realized. The iceberg had punctured the Titanic's starboard side, and water was pouring into the supposedly unsinkable vessel. The aftermath of the collision was a chaotic blend of confusion and missteps. Despite the urgency of the situation, the ship's officers hesitated to send out a distress signal. There was disbelief, denial, a reluctance to accept the impending doom. The Titanic was unsinkable, or so they had been led to believe. This hesitation cost precious minutes that could have been used to launch the lifeboats and usher passengers to safety. When the order was finally given to launch the lifeboats, another layer of confusion unfolded. Many of the lifeboats were launched half-empty, a consequence of poor coordination and the lack of a proper evacuation plan. The idea that the Titanic could sink was so far-fetched that no one had thoroughly considered what to do if it actually happened. The tragedy of the Titanic isn't just about an iceberg or a ship. It's a story of human error and misjudgment, of overconfidence and complacency. As water filled the Titanic, the ship's orchestra played on, a haunting melody that echoed through the ship's grand halls. The sinking of the Titanic wasn't just a collision with an iceberg, it was a collision with reality, a harsh reminder of our own fallibility. As water filled the Titanic, time was running out for its passengers. The Titanic's last night was a grim dance of despair and hope, a night that would forever be etched in the annals of maritime history. In the early hours of April 15, 1912, the Titanic began to sink. The final hours of the Titanic were a maelstrom of confusion and fear. The unsinkable ship was sinking, and the reality was harsher than anyone could have imagined. The ship that was once a symbol of human ingenuity and progress was now a chilling testament to the unpredictability of nature and the fragility of human life. The lack of lifeboats was a glaring issue. The Titanic was equipped with lifeboats for approximately half of the passengers. It was a tragic oversight, born from a misplaced confidence in the ship's invincibility. The shortage of lifeboats amplified the panic and chaos as passengers and crew scrambled for a spot, knowing that there were not enough to go around. Then there was the confusion, a devastating element in the disaster. The crew, unprepared for such a catastrophe, struggled to maintain order. Instructions were misunderstood, lifeboats were launched partially filled, and many passengers remained unaware of the seriousness of their situation until it was too late. This lack of clear communication and direction cost many lives. The death toll was exacerbated by the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. Even those who managed to escape the ship were not safe. In the frigid water, hypothermia set in quickly. The life jackets could keep people afloat, but they could not protect against the cold. Rescue was another factor. The closest ship, the Carpathia, was 4 hours away. Other ships received the Titanic's distress signals, but due to various reasons including miscommunication and technical issues, help did not arrive in time. Each minute that passed in the icy waters reduced the chances of survival for those in the sea. The Titanic, once considered the pinnacle of luxury and safety, was reduced to a sinking wreck within hours. The Unsinkable Ship, a floating city that was supposed to represent the apex of human achievement, was defeated by an iceberg and a series of unfortunate events. The Titanic, the unsinkable ship, had sunk. Who was to blame for this unprecedented disaster? This is the question that has been asked repeatedly in the century since the Titanic's tragic end. The aftermath of the disaster was marked by shock, grief, and a desperate need for answers. In the immediate aftermath, investigations were launched on both sides of the Atlantic. The American investigation, led by Senator William Alden Smith, placed a significant amount of blame on the ship's speed. They argued that if the Titanic had slowed down after receiving iceberg warnings, the collision might have been avoided, or at least less devastating. The British inquiry, on the other hand, honed in on the ignored iceberg warnings. They pointed out that the Titanic had received numerous warnings about ice in the area but chose to maintain its course and speed. This decision, they argued, was a significant factor in the disaster. Another point of contention was the inadequate number of lifeboats on board. With only enough lifeboats to carry about half of the Titanic's total capacity, the ship was woefully underprepared for a disaster of this magnitude. This was not an oversight but a deliberate decision, based on the belief that the ship was unsinkable. However, to lay the blame solely at the feet of one individual or group would be an oversimplification. The sinking of the Titanic was the result of a series of misjudgments, misfortunes, and human errors. It was a catastrophe that could have been avoided, had the right decisions been made at the right times. From the ship's speed to the ignored iceberg warnings, from the inadequate number of lifeboats to the belief in the ship's invincibility, each factor played a role in this tragedy. While we can point fingers and assign blame, we must also acknowledge the larger systemic failures that allowed such a disaster to occur. The sinking of the Titanic remains a haunting reminder of the limits of human ambition. It serves as a stark warning of the dangers of hubris and the need for caution, even in the face of great technological advances. It is a lesson that even a century later, we must never forget.